The dungeon was where you went when even death wouldn't have you yet. And as Valen pressed her back against the cold stone wall, watching the massive black wolf that had guarded her cell for 6 days straight, she understood one truth with perfect clarity. She was not meant to leave this place alive. They called her a hollow. A wolf born without a soul. An abomination that should have been killed at birth, but had somehow slipped through the cracks, hiding among real wolves for 23 years until her secret was finally exposed. The punishment for being a hollow was death by silver. No trial, no mercy, no exceptions. Yet the wolf never left. He lay across the threshold of her cell like a sentry, his amber eyes tracking her every movement. He growled when guards approached. He pushed food through the bars with his massive snout. And at night, when the cold became unbearable, he pressed his warm body against the iron, letting heat seep through to where she shivered. She didn't understand. Hollows were meant to be reviled, not protected. On the 6th day, footsteps echoed through the corridor, heavy, purposeful, carrying the kind of authority that made even the air grow still. The wolf rose, and for the first time since her imprisonment, he stepped aside. The door opened, and the Alpha King of Thornwall stood before her, beautiful as carved marble and twice as cold. His pale silver eyes passed over her without warmth, without interest, without anything at all. "She belongs to me now," he said. The guards protested. She was a criminal, a hollow, a creature that... "I said." The king interrupted, his voice dropping to something lethal. "She belongs to me." He would marry her. He would protect her. He would give her everything she needed. But he would never show her kindness. He would never love her. He would never explain why the wolf had guarded her cell, or why a king who could have anyone had chosen the one woman his entire kingdom wanted dead. Neither of them understood how impossible those vows would be. 6 days earlier, Valen had been dragged through the streets of Thornwall in chains. The crowd had gathered not to witness a criminal's arrest, but to see the monster their lord had finally captured. 23 years she had walked among them, and they had never known. The baker's daughter who had sold them bread. The quiet girl who had tended the temple gardens. The woman who had smiled and laughed and pretended to be one of them. A hollow, living in plain sight. "Kill it!" someone had screamed, and the cry had spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Kill the hollow before it curses us all." But the king's law was clear. Only royal decree could authorize the execution of a hollow. And the Alpha King was away at war, leaving Lord Morven, High Steward of Thornwall, in command. Her father. He had looked at her through the bars of the prisoner's cart with the same cold hatred he had always hidden behind closed doors. And he had smiled. "Take it to the depths," Lord Morven had commanded. "Let it rot until the king returns." The depths. The lowest level of Thornwall's dungeon, where no light reached and no sound escaped. Where prisoners were sent to be forgotten. Valen had expected to die there, alone in the dark, counting the hours until the king returned and signed her death warrant. She had not expected the wolf. He had appeared on the first night, massive and black as shadow, with eyes that glowed amber in the torchlight. The guards had fled at the sight of him. Even seasoned warriors knew better than to challenge a wolf that size, but he hadn't attacked her. He had simply lain down across the threshold of her cell and watched. By the 2nd day, Valen had stopped flinching whenever he moved. By the 3rd, she had started talking to him. What did it matter if she spoke to a beast? She was going to die anyway. She might as well have company. "I didn't ask to be born this way," she had whispered on the 4th night, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I didn't choose to be empty." The wolf had tilted his great head, listening. "Everyone has a wolf inside them. Everyone except me." Valen had pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the hollow space where her spirit should have lived. "I've spent my whole life pretending, faking the instincts, mimicking the behaviors. And I thought I was so clever." She had laughed, the sound bitter. I thought no one would ever know. The wolf had made a low sound, not a growl. Something softer. My father knew. Valen's voice had broken. He's always known. He married my mother thinking she was a pure-blooded wolf from good stock. When she birthed a hollow instead. She had closed her eyes. My mother tried to protect me. She died when I was 12. A fever, they said. After she was gone, there was no one left to stand between my father and his hatred. The wolf had risen then, padding closer to the bars. His snout had pressed through the gap, warm breath ghosting across her face. For one impossible moment, Valen had sworn she felt something. A presence brushing against the emptiness inside her, like a hand reaching through darkness. But that was impossible. Hollows couldn't feel the spirit realm. That was the whole point. Now, on the 6th day, as the Alpha King stood before her cell, Valen understood that the wolf had been guarding her for a reason. She just didn't know what that reason was. "Get up," the king commanded. Valen tried to rise, but her legs buckled after 6 days of barely eating. She stumbled, catching herself against the wall. The king watched impassively. He made no move to help her. "Your Majesty." One of the guards stepped forward nervously. "This creature is scheduled for execution. Lord Morven has already prepared the silver—" "Lord Morven," the king interrupted, his voice like ice cracking, "does not decide what happens to prisoners in my kingdom. I do." The guard paled and stepped back. King Colvin entered the cell. Up close, he was overwhelming. Tall enough that Valen had to crane her neck to meet his eyes, broad enough to block the torchlight behind him. His hair was dark, falling past his shoulders in a way that should have softened his features, but somehow made him look more predatory instead. And his face. Beautiful was too simple a word. He was beautiful the way a winter storm was beautiful. The way a blade was beautiful. Cold and sharp and utterly without mercy. "You've been accused of being a hollow," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Valen managed. "And are you?" The question hung between them. She could lie. She could try to talk her way out of this, claim the accusation was false, that her father had manufactured evidence to destroy her. But the king's silver eyes held hers, and something in that gaze made lying feel impossible. "I don't know what I am," she said finally. "I've never had a wolf. I've never felt one, never heard one, never shifted." Her voice steadied as she spoke the truth aloud for the first time in her life. "But I don't feel empty. Not the way the texts describe hollows. There's something inside me. I just don't know how to reach it." The king studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to the guards. "Prepare her for transport to the palace. She's to be bathed, fed, and dressed in clothing befitting my future queen." Chaos erupted. The guards protested. A messenger stammered about Lord Morven's orders. Someone whispered about the curse that followed hollows, how they drained the life from those around them, how marrying one would doom the entire kingdom. Through it all, the king said nothing. He simply waited until the noise died down, until the silence became suffocating. "Does anyone else wish to question my decision?" he asked quietly. No one spoke. "Then do as I command." He turned back to Valen, and for just a moment something flickered in those cold silver eyes. "You'll understand soon enough why I've chosen you. For now, all you need to know is this. You belong to me, and no one will touch what's mine." He strode out of the cell without looking back. The black wolf rose from where he had been lying in the corridor. He padded after the king, and Valen watched them go, two predators moving in perfect synchronization. It wasn't until they had disappeared around the corner that she realized she had never seen them in the same place at the same time. The palace of Thornwall rose from the cliffs like a beast of stone and shadow. Valen watched it grow larger through the carriage window, her stomach tight with dread. 6 days ago, she had been a temple gardener. Now she was being transported to the seat of power, dressed in borrowed silks, about to become— What? The king had said, queen. But that made no sense. None of this made any sense. The carriage stopped. Guards opened the door and escorted her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Everywhere she looked, she saw wealth. Tapestries depicting ancient hunts, chandeliers dripping with crystal, floors polished to mirrors. And everywhere she looked, she saw people staring. Word had spread fast. The king had claimed a hollow. By the time she reached the throne room, Valen's composure was barely holding. She had been poked and prodded by servants, scrubbed raw in bathwater that smelled of roses, and stuffed into a gown so fine she was afraid to breathe. Her hair had been brushed until it gleamed, cascading down her back in waves of deep auburn. She looked like a noblewoman. She felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. King Colvin sat on the throne at the far end of the hall, flanked by advisors and guards. In the light of day, he was even more striking than he had been in the dungeon. The silver of his eyes caught the torchlight and fractured it into something cold and sharp. "Approach," he commanded. Valen walked the length of the hall, feeling every gaze like a blade against her skin. When she reached the steps of the throne, she stopped and curtsied. "Your Majesty." "You may rise." She straightened, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "The terms of our arrangement are simple," the king said, his voice carrying through the hall. "You will become my wife, my queen. You will bear my heirs to secure the succession of Thornwall. In exchange, I will protect you from those who would see you executed. You will live in comfort. You will want for nothing." He paused. The silence felt heavy. "However," he continued, "this will be a marriage of necessity, not affection. We will not share chambers outside of what is required to produce children. We will not dine together. We will not spend time in each other's company. You will attend royal functions when required, and otherwise, you will live your own life within these walls." An advisor shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the crowd whispered, "I will never show you kindness beyond what duty requires," the king finished, his voice flat. "And I will never love you. These are my terms. Do you accept them?" Valen stared at him. This was insane. All of it. She was a hollow, or something close to it. She was a prisoner condemned to death. And the most powerful wolf in the kingdom was offering her not just freedom, but a crown? Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. The king's expression didn't change. "Why what?" "Why me?" Valen asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "You could have anyone. Princesses from allied kingdoms, noblewomen from powerful houses, women who are beautiful and whole and—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "Not this. Not me. So why?" For a long moment the king said nothing. Then, so quietly that only she could hear, "Because the wolf chose you." Valen blinked. "The wolf? The one who guarded my cell?" But the king had already turned back to the assembled court. "Does anyone object to this union?" Silence. "Then it is settled." He rose from the throne. "The wedding will take place in 3 days. Until then, the lady will be housed in the queen's wing and treated with all respect due to her station." He descended the steps, passing close enough that Valen could feel the cold radiating from his body. It was unnatural, that cold. Wolves ran hot. Everyone knew that, but King Colvin felt like winter itself. "Your Majesty, wait." Valen caught his arm without thinking. The entire court gasped. No one touched the king uninvited. No one. Colvin stopped. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then up at her face. His expression was utterly unreadable. "You said the wolf chose me," Valen whispered. "What does that mean?" Something flickered in his silver eyes. Pain, maybe. Or something older and deeper. "It means," he said quietly, "that neither of us has a choice in this." Then he pulled away and strode out of the throne room. Valen stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had 1,000 questions and no answers. But one thing had become clear. The black wolf wasn't just a guard dog or a palace pet. He was something far more significant. And the king knew exactly what that significance was. The queen's wing was larger than Valen's entire village. She had been given a suite of rooms that included a bedchamber, a sitting room, a private bath, and a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The furniture was carved from dark wood and upholstered in deep blue velvet. The bed alone could have fit 10 people. And yet, Valen felt like she couldn't breathe. "My lady?" The servant who had been assigned to her, a young woman named Saris with kind eyes and careful hands, paused in the doorway. "Is something wrong?" "Everything," Valen thought. "Everything is wrong." But she shook her head. "I'm fine. Thank you, Saris." The girl nodded and retreated, leaving Valen alone. She wandered to the balcony, pressing her palms against the stone railing. Below, the gardens stretched out in carefully manicured rows of hedges and flowers. Beyond them, the cliffs dropped away to the sea, its surface glittering in the afternoon sun. It was beautiful, all of it. And it felt like a cage made of gold. A sound drew her attention, a soft scrape of claws against stone. Valen turned, her breath catching. The black wolf stood in the doorway of her chambers. He was even larger than she remembered, his shoulders reaching almost to her hip. His fur was so dark it seemed to absorb the light around him. And those amber eyes. They watched her with an intelligence that was almost unsettling. "You," Valen breathed. The wolf padded forward, his movements fluid and silent. He stopped a few feet away from her, his great head tilted as if waiting. Slowly, carefully, Valen reached out her hand. The wolf pressed his snout against her palm. His fur was coarse but warm, his breath hot against her skin. Something stirred in Valen's chest, that same impossible sensation she had felt in the dungeon. A presence. A reaching. "Who are you?" she whispered. The wolf pulled back. He sat on his haunches, watching her with an expression that was almost sad. Before Valen could say anything else, footsteps echoed in the corridor. The wolf's ears flicked toward the sound. He rose fluidly, padding past her to a shadowed corner of the room, where he lay down and became almost invisible in the darkness. A moment later, the door opened. Valen expected a servant, perhaps Saris returning with food or clothes. She did not expect the man who entered. Lord Morven, her father. He looked exactly as he always had, tall and thin, with silver hair swept back from a sharp-featured face. His eyes were pale blue, the same color as Valen's, but where hers held warmth, his held only calculation. "So," he said, closing the door behind him. "The abomination rises." Valen's hands clenched at her sides. "Father, don't call me that." His lip curled with disgust. "I should have drowned you at birth. Your mother begged me not to, convinced herself you might develop a wolf later. By the time it became clear you never would, it was too late. People knew you existed. Questions would have been asked." He stepped closer, and Valen forced herself not to retreat. "But now everyone knows what you are," Lord Morven continued. "A hollow, an empty shell. And somehow, impossibly, you've managed to ensnare the king himself." He shook his head. "What did you do? What dark magic did you work to make him choose you?" "I did nothing," Valen said, her voice low. "He chose me. I don't know why." "Liar." Her father's hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to bruise. "The king doesn't make decisions without reason. What did you offer him? What did you promise?" "Nothing." Valen tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "I don't know why he wants me. I don't know anything about—" A growl cut through the room. Lord Morven froze. The black wolf rose from the shadows, his massive body blocking the path to the door. His lips pulled back, revealing fangs that gleamed white in the afternoon light. The growl deepened, vibrating through the floor. "Step away from her!" The king's voice came from the doorway. Valen looked past her father to see Colvin standing in the entrance, his silver eyes fixed on Lord Morven with an intensity that could have melted steel. Her father released her wrist immediately, bowing low. "Your Majesty, I was merely welcoming my daughter to her new... You were threatening my future queen in her own chambers." The king's voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "If the wolf had torn out your throat, no one in this kingdom would have questioned my judgment in letting him." Lord Morven paled. "I meant no. Leave." The single word held more authority than any army. Lord Morven straightened, his jaw tight with suppressed fury, and walked out without another word. The king remained in the doorway. Valen rubbed her wrist, trying to calm her racing heart. "Thank you," she managed. Colvin's gaze dropped to her wrist, where bruises were already forming. Something dark flickered across his face, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "He won't touch you again," the king said. "I'll make sure of it. He's the High Steward. He practically runs the kingdom while you're away. How can you—" "He runs nothing." The king's voice cut like a blade. "Whatever power he has existed only because I allowed it. That permission has been revoked." Valen stared at him. In the dungeon, in the throne room, he had been cold and distant. But now, with her father's handprint still throbbing on her skin, there was something almost protective in his stance. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. "You said you would never show me kindness. You said this was purely contractual." For a long moment the king didn't answer. Then he looked at the wolf, who had padded over to stand beside Valen, his shoulder pressed against her hip. "Because he cares," Colvin said finally, "and that means something, whether I understand it or not." Before Valen could ask what that meant, the king turned and walked away. The wolf remained. He looked up at her with those amber eyes, and Valen felt that strange stirring again, that impossible sense of something reaching toward her from within the emptiness. "What are you?" she whispered. The wolf pressed his head against her hand, warm and solid and undeniably real. But he didn't answer. And Valen was left with the growing certainty that the mystery of the wolf was the key to understanding everything. The king's coldness, his impossible choice, and the secret neither of them had spoken aloud. The wedding was held 3 days later, exactly as the king had promised. Valen stood before a mirror in the queen's wing, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. The gown was ivory silk embroidered with silver thread, clinging to her curves before cascading into a train that pooled at her feet. Her auburn hair had been swept up and woven with tiny crystals that caught the light. A delicate veil covered her face, not to hide what she was, but because tradition demanded it. "You look beautiful, my lady," Kara said softly, adjusting the fall of the train. "Beautiful." Valen almost laughed. She was a hollow marrying an alpha king. Beauty had nothing to do with why she was here. "Has anyone ever refused to marry the king?" Valen asked quietly. Karis's hand stilled. "I don't believe so, my lady. Why would anyone refuse?" "Why indeed? Power, wealth, protection, a crown. Any woman in the kingdom would kill for this opportunity. Any woman who didn't know what Valen knew, that the king felt nothing for her, that this marriage was a transaction, that she was trading one cage for another. But at least this cage came with survival. The journey to the Great Hall felt endless. Valen walked through corridors lined with courtiers, their whispers following her like shadows. She heard the words they didn't bother to hide. Hollow, cursed, unnatural. Some wondered if she had bewitched the king. Others speculated that this was some elaborate punishment, that she would be publicly executed at the altar. When she finally reached the hall, her breath caught. It was magnificent. Thousands of candles hung from the vaulted ceiling, their flames reflected in the polished stone floors. The pews were packed with nobility dressed in their finest. And at the far end, standing before the altar with his hands clasped behind his back, was King Colvin. He wore black, as always. The formal attire emphasized everything about him that was dangerous. The breadth of his shoulders, the sharp lines of his jaw, the cold silver of his eyes as they tracked her approach. And beside him, sitting perfectly still, was the black wolf. Valen's steps faltered. The wolf had never appeared in public before. Whispers exploded through the crowd, a wave of shock and confusion rolling through the hall. Is that the king's beast? I've never seen it outside the palace grounds. Why is it here? At the wedding? Valen forced herself to keep walking, one foot in front of the other. The aisle stretched before her like a path to her own execution. When she reached the altar, she stopped. The king's gaze held hers through the thin fabric of her veil. You came, he said quietly, so only she could hear. Did I have a choice? A shadow of emotion passed through his silver gaze. There's always a choice. Before she could respond, the officiant began the ceremony. The words washed over her. Ancient vows spoken in the old tongue, promises of fidelity and union that felt hollow given the circumstances. But Valen repeated them when prompted, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Then came the claiming. In a traditional wolf wedding, the couple would shift and mark each other, a physical bond that sealed their wolves together for eternity. But Valen couldn't shift. She had no wolf to offer. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see how the king would handle this impossible situation. Colvin stepped closer. His hand rose to her veil, and Valen's heart stopped. May I? He asked softly. She nodded, unable to speak. He lifted the veil slowly, folding it back to reveal her face. For the first time, the entire court saw her clearly, saw the woman their king had chosen. She wasn't hideous. She wasn't scarred. She was simply ordinary. A commoner's daughter with auburn hair and pale blue eyes, and a face that held no particular beauty or ugliness. The disappointment in the crowd was palpable. They had expected a monster. Colvin studied her face for a long moment. Then he leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. I claim you before gods and wolves, he murmured, his breath cold against her skin. Not because I love you, but because you are mine, and I protect what is mine. He pulled back. His hand rose to cup her cheek, the first tender gesture he had ever shown her, and then he pressed his lips to her forehead. The hall erupted. A claiming kiss was supposed to be passionate, possessive, a declaration of desire. This was something else entirely. This was reverent, almost gentle. The wolf at Colvin's side let out a low sound, not quite a howl, not quite a whine. Something that sounded almost like sorrow. And then it was done. They were married. That night, Valen waited in the bridal chambers with her heart in her throat. The room had been prepared with obvious care, candles casting soft light, rose petals scattered across the silk sheets, a fire burning low in the hearth. Everything designed for romance. Everything except the groom. When Colvin finally entered, he looked exhausted. The ceremony had drained something from him. His movements were slower than usual, his face pale beneath its customary coldness. You don't have to do this tonight, Valen said quickly. If you're tired, we can wait. No. He closed the door behind him. The court will expect proof of consummation. If we delay, rumors will spread. They'll say the marriage isn't valid. Valen's stomach tightened. So this is just duty. Yes. He met her eyes. Isn't that what we agreed? She should have felt relief. He wasn't going to pretend this was something it wasn't. But instead, she felt a strange ache in her chest. That hollow space where her wolf should have lived, pulsing with something she couldn't name. Colvin approached the bed slowly. He sat on the edge, his movements careful, controlled. I should warn you, he said quietly. I am not warm, physically. The cold is part of my condition. If it becomes too uncomfortable... I've felt it, Valen interrupted. When you touched me at the ceremony, it doesn't bother me. He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, never warmth, but something close to curiosity. Most people flinch away from my touch, he said. I'm not most people. She moved closer, sitting beside him on the bed. I've been called cold my whole life. Empty. A shell without a soul. Your temperature is the least frightening thing about this night. Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Colvin reached for her. His hands were cold, yes, cold as mountain streams, cold as winter wind, but they were gentle. He undressed her carefully, his fingers working the laces of her gown with patient precision. And when the silk finally fell away, he didn't look at her body. He looked at her face. Tell me if I hurt you, he said. And then his mouth found hers. The kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant. But something sparked between them. Something unexpected. Valen gasped against his lips, and Colvin's control cracked just slightly. His hands tightened on her waist. His kiss deepened. He laid her back against the pillows, his body covering hers, and the cold of his skin against her warmth created a sensation that was almost electric. She arched into him, surprising herself with how much she wanted this, wanted him, despite everything. When they finally came together, there was pain. But there was also something else, a connection that went beyond the physical. For just a moment, Valen felt that presence again, that reaching, and she could have sworn she heard a wolf howl somewhere in the distance. Afterward, Colvin lay beside her, his breathing ragged. His arm was draped across her stomach, holding her close in a way that contradicted everything he had said about duty and transaction. That sound, Valen whispered, the howling. Was that sleep? His voice was rough. We'll talk in the morning. But when Valen woke with the dawn, he was gone. Only the indent in the pillow beside her proved he had been there at all. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of Valen learning the rhythms of palace life, of navigating a court that viewed her with suspicion and contempt, of trying to understand the impossible man she had married. And 3 weeks of the king returning to her chambers every night. It had started the evening after their wedding. Valen had been reading by the fire when the door opened and Colvin stepped inside, his expression unreadable. You don't have to keep coming, she had said, surprised. The consummation was witnessed. The marriage is valid. I'm aware. He had closed the door behind him. Do you want me to leave? The honest answer was no. Despite everything, despite the coldness, the distance, the impossible circumstances, Valen found herself craving his presence. There was something about him that called to the empty space inside her, something that made her feel less hollow. Stay, she had whispered. He had stayed. And he had returned, the next night, and the next, and the next. Now, as autumn deepened into winter, Valen had stopped questioning why. She simply accepted that this strange, cold king wanted to spend his nights in her bed, even if he could barely stand to spend his days in her company. But she had started to notice things. Small things at first, the way his skin grew colder when he was tired or stressed. The way his movements sometimes synchronized perfectly with the black wolf that still appeared and disappeared throughout the palace. The way he never seemed to eat much, as if sustenance was optional rather than necessary. And the way he shivered sometimes, even in a room heated by roaring fires. You're freezing, Valen said one night, pulling the blankets higher around them. This can't be normal, even for your condition. Colvin was silent for a long moment. Then, it's getting worse. Her heart clenched. What's getting worse? But he didn't answer. He simply pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair, and held her until his shivering stopped. The next morning, Valen sought out the palace library. She spent hours poring over ancient texts, searching for any mention of a condition that caused unnatural cold in wolves. What she found instead was something far more troubling: the severing. According to the oldest records in the library, there had once been a king. Colvin's ancestor, several generations back, who had sought to eliminate emotion from the royal bloodline. He believed that feelings made rulers weak, made them vulnerable to manipulation and poor judgment. So he had commissioned a powerful witch to perform a dark ritual, the severing. The ritual had ripped the wolf spirit from every male heir in the royal line, forcing it to exist outside the body as a separate entity. Without the wolf's emotional influence, the kings became cold, calculating, perfect rulers. Their wolves walked beside them as loyal hounds, bound by magic but separate from their hosts. But there was a cost. The separation was never meant to be permanent. The wolf and the man needed each other to survive. Apart, both began to deteriorate. The wolf growing more feral, the man growing colder until eventually. Valen's blood ran cold as she read the final passage. If the king ever truly bonds with another, if he forms a genuine mate connection, the wolf will attempt to return to its host. The merge will either heal both or destroy them. She slammed the book shut, her hands shaking. The black wolf wasn't just connected to Colvin. The black wolf was Colvin. His wolf. His soul. Walking beside him because it had been ripped away before he was ever born. And she had been feeling that wolf's presence. That reaching. Because the wolf was trying to bond with her. That night, when Colvin came to her chambers, Valen was waiting. "Tell me about the wolf," she said before he could speak. He froze in the doorway. "What about him?" "Don't." Her voice cracked. "Don't lie to me. I read about the severing. I know what he is. I know what you are." The silence that followed was deafening. Slowly, Colvin stepped inside and closed the door. His face was carefully blank, but his scent, that winter-sharp coldness, had intensified. "Who told you where to look?" he asked quietly. "No one. I figured it out myself." Valen stood, crossing the room to face him. "The wolf guards me. He protects me. He looks at me like he knows me, like he wants something from me. And you're cold. Literally cold. Because half of you is missing." Colvin's jaw tightened. "Is that why you chose me?" Valen demanded. "Because I'm hollow too? Because you thought two broken things might fit together?" "No." The word came out rough, almost pained. "I chose you because he chose you." "The wolf." "Yes." Colvin's hands clenched at his sides. "I've had him my whole life, walking beside me, separate but bound. I've never felt warmth from him. Never felt anything through our connection except cold and duty and distance. Until you." Valen's breath caught. "When you were in that dungeon," Colvin continued, his voice dropping, "he went to you. Without my command. Without my permission. He guarded you for 6 days. And through him, I felt something I'd never felt before." "What?" His silver eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw emotion in their depths, raw and painful and desperately suppressed. "Warmth," he whispered. "He felt warmth near you, and through him, so did I." Valen's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "What does that mean?" "It means he wants to bond with you. Truly bond." Colvin's voice hardened. "And if he does, if I let myself feel what he's feeling, he'll try to return to me. The merge will happen, and you'll be whole again. Or I'll die." His laugh was bitter. No king has ever survived the merge. The wolf becomes too feral after years of separation. It doesn't remember how to exist inside a body. It tears the host apart trying to fit. Valen reached for him before she could stop herself, her hand pressing against his chest. His heart beat beneath her palm, steady, slow, cold. "Then we won't let it happen," she said fiercely. "We'll find another way. There has to be. There is no other way." He caught her wrist, but he didn't push her away. "I've spent 28 years searching. Every witch, every healer, every ancient text. The curse is unbreakable." "Then why did you marry me?" Valen's voice broke. Why bring me here at all if you knew? Because I couldn't stay away. The confession seemed to tear itself from him. Because for the first time in my life, I felt something other than cold. And I was selfish enough to want more of it, even knowing what it might cost. They stood there, frozen, his hand around her wrist and her palm over his heart. Then Valen did something neither of them expected. She kissed him, not soft, not hesitant. She kissed him with everything she had, all her fear and confusion and desperate, impossible hope. And after a moment of rigid shock, Colvin kissed her back, his arms wrapped around her, crushing her against his chest. The cold of his body seeped into her skin, but she didn't care. She pressed closer, deeper, trying to give him every ounce of warmth she possessed. Somewhere in the palace, a wolf howled. Winter melted into spring, and Valen discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for weeks. The nausea, the exhaustion, the strange sensitivity to certain smells. But she hadn't wanted to believe it until the healer confirmed what her body already knew. "Congratulations, Your Majesty," the old woman said, her weathered face creasing into a smile. "You carry the next heir of Thornwall." Valen pressed her hand against her still flat stomach, her emotions a tangled mess of joy and terror. An heir. A child. Something she had never dared to dream of, growing inside her hollow body. But all she could think about was Colvin. What would this mean for his curse? If the wolf was already drawn to her, already trying to bond, what would happen when there was a child that was part of them both? She found the king in his study that evening, surrounded by maps and documents. He looked up when she entered, and for just a moment, his cold expression softened. "You should be resting," he said. "I needed to tell you something." Valen closed the door behind her, leaning against it for support. "The healer came today." Colvin went very still. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Slowly, the king rose from his chair. He crossed the room to stand before her, his silver eyes searching her face. "You're certain?" The healer confirmed it. Something cracked in his expression, a fissure in that perfect control he always maintained. His hand rose to touch her stomach, his palm cold against her through the fabric of her gown. "A child," he breathed. And then he did something Valen had never seen him do. He smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, warmer, and almost human. The cold in his eyes thawed just enough to reveal something beneath. Wonder, hope, a desperate, fragile joy. "We're having a child," he repeated, as if saying it again would make it more real. Valen's throat tightened with emotion. "You're happy?" "I never thought—" He stopped, shook his head. "The curse. I assumed it would prevent— that I couldn't." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. His face pressed into her hair, and she felt his shoulders shake with something that might have been laughter or might have been tears. "Thank you," he murmured against her temple. "Thank you, Valen." It was the first time he had ever called her by her name. The months that followed were the happiest of Valen's life. Colvin visited her chambers not just at night but throughout the day. He brought her books from the library. He walked with her in the gardens. He sat beside her bed when the pregnancy exhausted her, reading aloud in his low, steady voice until she fell asleep. And slowly, impossibly, the cold between them began to thaw. He still couldn't say the words, couldn't tell her what she increasingly knew he felt, but his actions spoke louder than any declaration. The way he looked at her, the way he touched her stomach, feeling for their child's movements, the way he fell asleep beside her now, his arm draped protectively over her body. The black wolf appeared more frequently too. He lay at the foot of their bed, his amber eyes watching Valen with something that looked almost like contentment. Sometimes she would reach down to stroke his fur, and she would feel that reaching again, stronger now, more insistent, as if the wolf was trying to tell her something important. On the night her labor began, Colvin held her hand through every contraction. "You're doing well," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Just breathe. I'm here." "Colvin." She gripped his fingers, panting through the pain. "The wolf. Where is he?" The king's expression flickered. "Outside the door. He won't leave. He should be here." She didn't know why she said it, didn't understand the instinct, but it felt important. "Please, let him in." Colvin hesitated, then nodded to the midwife. The door opened, and the black wolf padded inside, his massive form settling beside the bed. The moment he did, something changed. The pain didn't lessen, but Valen felt a warmth spreading through her, that reaching presence, stronger than ever, wrapping around her like an embrace. And through the haze of labor, she saw the wolf's amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. Hours passed. The sun rose. And finally, her child was born. A boy, healthy and squalling, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that were neither silver nor blue, but something in between. The midwife placed him in Valen's arms, and she wept with joy. "He's perfect," she whispered. Colvin leaned over them both, his hand trembling as he touched their son's tiny face. "He's beautiful." His voice cracked. "You're both so beautiful." Valen looked up at her husband, this cold, cursed king who had chosen her when no one else would, and saw tears tracking down his cheeks. "I love you," she breathed. The words spilled out before she could stop them, born of exhaustion and joy and overwhelming emotion. "I know you said you couldn't, that the curse. But I love you, Colvin. I love you so much it terrifies me." His eyes widened, and then, without thinking, without calculation, without any of his careful control, he said, "I love you too." The moment the words left his lips, the wolf howled. Not a joyful sound, a sound of pain, raw, tearing, agonizing. The wolf's body convulsed, his form flickering like a candle in the wind. Colvin gasped, his hand flying to his chest. His face went white. His skin, already cold, turned to ice beneath Valen's touch. "Colvin?" She clutched the baby tighter, terror flooding through her. "What's happening, Colvin?" But the king couldn't answer. His eyes rolled back, his body seized, and as the wolf's howl rose to a scream, Colvin collapsed to the floor. "Someone help us!" Valen screamed, clutching her newborn son as Colvin convulsed on the floor. "The king is dying!" Guards burst through the door, healers came running, but no one knew what to do. They stood frozen, watching their king seize and shudder, frost spreading across his skin like a disease. The black wolf, who had been lying beside the bed, suddenly convulsed as well. He collapsed onto his side, his massive body twitching in synchronization with Colvin's. His howls had faded to whimpers, then to silence. "It's the merge," Valen gasped, remembering what she had read. "The wolf is trying to return to him. We have to stop it. We have to." "There's nothing to be done." Lord Morven's voice cut through the chaos. Valen's blood ran cold. Her father stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards bearing his personal crest. In the confusion of the king's collapse, no one had thought to bar the High Steward's entry. His expression was one of grim satisfaction. He stepped inside, waving the guards aside as if he had every right to be there. "The curse is activating," he continued, moving closer to Colvin's prone form. "The king confessed love. The wolf is attempting to merge, and just like every king before him, he will die." "No." Valen struggled to rise, still weak from childbirth. "There has to be a way." "There isn't." Lord Morven's pale eyes gleamed. "I made certain of that." The room went silent. "What did you say?" Valen whispered. Her father smiled, that cold, calculating smile she had learned to fear as a child. "Did you think this was coincidence?" he asked softly. "That my hollow daughter just happened to catch the eye of a cursed king? That his wolf just happened to choose you out of everyone in this kingdom?" Valen's arms tightened around her baby. "What are you talking about?" I've been planning this for 20 years. Lord Morven began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. Ever since I discovered what you truly were. A hollow, Valen said bitterly. No. Her father stopped, turning to face her with something like triumph in his expression. Not a hollow. Something far more valuable. Something I could use. He crossed to her in 3 quick strides, gripping her chin and forcing her to meet his eyes. You were never empty, you stupid girl. You were waiting. Your wolf was never missing. It was dormant. Sleeping. Waiting for the right trigger to awaken it. Valen's heart stopped. The ancient texts describe it, Lord Morven continued. A rare condition, occurring perhaps once in 1,000 years. A wolf born in slumber, unable to wake on its own. It needs something to rouse it, a powerful connection, a bond strong enough to pull it from its sleep. The king's wolf, Valen breathed, understanding crashing over her. You knew his wolf would be drawn to mine. I counted on it. Her father released her chin, stepping back. I arranged for your arrest. I made sure you were placed in the deepest dungeon, where the king's wolf would sense your presence. I knew he would guard you. I knew the king would become curious. And I knew, eventually, that their bond with you would trigger the merge. But why? Tears burned down Valen's cheeks. Why would you want the king to die? Because when the king dies without a named successor, the High Steward assumes control of the realm. Lord Morven's smile widened. And who do you think convinced the previous king to keep me in that position? I've been waiting decades for this moment. All I needed was the right weapon. He looked at her with cold contempt. You were always meant to be a tool, daughter. A means to an end. The fact that you've produced an heir is inconvenient, but easily remedied. Infants die all the time. Tragic accidents. No one will question. Touch my son and I will kill you. The words came out low and savage, carrying a force that surprised even Valen herself. And as she spoke them, something stirred in her chest. Not the reaching presence she had felt before. Something deeper. Something that had been sleeping for 23 years and was finally beginning to wake. Lord Morven's eyes widened. That's not possible, he breathed. Your wolf is dormant, it can't. A growl ripped through the room. Not from the black wolf on the floor, from Valen. Her vision sharpened, her senses exploded. She could smell her father's fear now, acrid and sharp beneath his cologne. She could hear his heartbeat, racing with sudden terror. And she could feel her son in her arms, warm and alive and completely dependent on her protection. Her wolf was waking, and it was furious. Guards! Lord Morven stumbled backward. Seize her! She's transforming! She'll... But the guards didn't move. They were staring at Valen with something like awe, watching as her eyes shifted from pale blue to burning gold. You spent my whole life telling me I was nothing, Valen said, her voice layered with a harmonic depth it had never possessed before. Empty, hollow, a shell without a soul. But you knew the truth all along. She rose to her feet, her legs steady now, strength flooding through her as her wolf continued to wake. You knew I had a wolf. You knew she was sleeping. And you knew that if she ever woke up, she would be powerful enough to threaten everything you'd built. Lord Morven's back hit the wall. Valen, listen to me. No. She moved toward him, her baby still cradled safely in her arms. I'm done listening to you. I'm done believing your lies. And I'm done being your weapon. She stopped inches from his face, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. You wanted to use me to destroy the king, she said softly. But you forgot something important. What? He whispered. A sleeping wolf can be woken. Her lips curved into a smile that was all teeth. And a waking wolf remembers everything. Images flooded her mind, memories that weren't quite her own. Her wolf, sleeping but still aware, had seen everything, heard everything. remembered every cruelty, every manipulation, and every scheme her father had enacted over 23 years, including the night he had paid a witch to curse her mother into silence, ensuring she could never reveal what she knew about her daughter's true nature, including the night he had poisoned that same mother when the curse began to fail. "You killed her," Valen breathed. "My mother. She didn't die of fever. You murdered her." Lord Morven's face went gray. "Guards," Valen said, her voice carrying the unmistakable ring of royal command. "Arrest Lord Morven for treason, conspiracy against the crown, and the murder of Lady Morven." The guards moved instantly, seizing her father's arms before he could flee. "You can't do this!" he screamed as they dragged him toward the door. "I'm the High Steward. I have rights. I demand—" "You demanded my death when I was 3 days old," Valen interrupted coldly. "My mother begged you to spare me. She spent her whole life protecting me from you. And you killed her for it." She watched as her father was hauled away, his screams echoing down the corridor until they finally faded to silence. Then she turned back to her husband. Colvin lay still on the floor, the frost covering most of his body now. The black wolf beside him had stopped moving entirely, his amber eyes glazed and unseeing. They were both dying. And Valen finally understood what she needed to do. "Everyone out," Valen commanded. The healers and servants hesitated. Now, they fled. Valen knelt beside her husband, her newborn son still cradled against her chest. The baby was quiet now, his strange silver-blue eyes watching his father's frozen form with an awareness that seemed impossible for an infant. "I know what you need," Valen whispered, reaching out to touch the black wolf's cold fur. "Both of you." The texts had said the merge would fail because the wolf became too feral, too separate, too wild to reintegrate with its host. Generations of kings had died because their wolves had forgotten how to exist inside a body. But Valen wasn't trying to force the wolf back into Colvin. She was offering it somewhere else to go first. "I've had empty space inside me my whole life," she murmured, closing her eyes. "Room that was supposed to hold my wolf, but never quite fit her while she slept. She's stirring now, but she's small still, newly awakened. There's room enough for both of you. Just for a little while." She pressed her hand flat against the black wolf's chest, feeling the faint flutter of his heart. "Come to me first. Let me hold you. Let me remind you what it feels like to be warm, to be safe, and to be loved. And then, when you remember, go back to him." For a long moment nothing happened. Then the wolf's amber eyes flickered, and Valen felt him. Not the reaching presence she had experienced before. This was something entirely different. This was a flood. A tidal wave of emotion and memory and pure, raw consciousness pouring into the space inside her that had been empty for so long. She gasped, her body arching, her vision going white. She felt him, the wolf, Colvin's wolf, who had walked beside his human half for 28 years. She felt his loneliness, his sorrow, his desperate love for a man who couldn't feel him back. She felt his joy when he had first sensed her in that dungeon, the warmth that had drawn him like a moth to flame. And she felt his fear. Fear that the merge would kill them both. Fear that he had forgotten how to be whole. Fear that love would destroy the only person he had ever truly wanted to protect. "It's all right," Valen whispered, though she didn't know if she was speaking aloud or only in her mind. "I've got you. I've got you both." She held him. Not physically. The wolf's body still lay beside Colvin on the floor. But spiritually, she wrapped herself around him, letting her waking wolf curl against his exhausted form. Two wolves, tangled together in the space inside her chest, sharing warmth and breath and heartbeat. Her wolf nuzzled against him, gentle and patient, showing him what she had learned in her long sleep: how to be still, how to rest, how to exist inside a body without tearing it apart. And slowly, impossibly, the black wolf remembered. He remembered what it had felt like, generations ago, before the severing. When wolves and humans existed as one being, inseparable and whole. He remembered warmth that didn't burn, closeness that didn't destroy. He remembered love. Go back to him now, Valen breathed. He needs you. He's always needed you. The wolf hesitated. I'll still be here. She pressed her forehead against his massive head, tears spilling down her face. You can visit whenever you want, but he can't live without you, and I can't live without him. So please, please, go home. For one eternal moment, everything was still. Then the wolf moved. Valen felt him leave her, felt the rush of absence as he poured out of the space she had held for him and flooded back into his true host. She collapsed forward, barely catching herself before she crushed the baby in her arms, and Colvin screamed. His back arched off the floor, his hands clawed at his chest. The frost that had covered his body began to crack, then shatter, falling away in glittering shards as heat flooded back into his frozen form. The black wolf's physical body dissolved, becoming mist, becoming light, becoming nothing at all as it merged with its other half. And then, silence. Colvin lay still, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Color was returning to his cheeks. His skin, when Valen touched it, was warm. Not hot, not feverish, but warm, normal, human. Colvin? She whispered. His eyes opened. They were still silver, but different somehow. Deeper. More alive. As if something that had been missing for 28 years had finally returned. Valen. His voice was hoarse but strong. His hand rose to cup her cheek, and his touch was gentle, steady, warm. What did you do? I held him for you. Tears spilled down her face. Your wolf. He forgot how to come home. So I reminded him. Colvin stared at her. Then he looked at the baby in her arms, at the empty space where the black wolf had lain, at the frost still glittering on the floor around them. And he began to laugh. Not bitter, or cold, or controlled. A real laugh. Warm and wondering and utterly joyful. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her, and their son against his chest, and he laughed until the laughter turned to tears. I can feel him, he gasped, inside me. For the first time in my life, I can feel him. We're whole, Valen finished. Yes. Colvin pulled back, cupping her face in both hands, staring at her like she was the most precious thing in the entire world. Because of you. You saved me, Valen. You saved us both. You saved me first. She smiled through her tears. In that dungeon. When no one else would. He kissed her then, deep and desperate and blazing with emotion he no longer had to suppress. And when they finally broke apart, both breathless, Valen felt something she had never felt before in her entire life. Complete. 6 months later, Valen stood in the palace gardens, watching her son take his first wobbly steps across the grass. Torin, they had named him. It meant strong spirit in the old tongue, and he was. Strong and healthy, and growing faster than anyone had expected. His eyes had settled into a striking silver blue that reminded Valen of a winter sky at dawn. Already she could sense his wolf stirring inside him, awake and aware from birth. Nothing like her own wolf, who had slumbered for 23 years before finally awakening. The curse was broken. Completely, irrevocably broken. When Colvin had merged with his wolf, something had changed in the royal bloodline. The severing had been undone, not just for him, but for all future generations. Torin would never walk beside his wolf as a separate being. He would carry his spirit inside him, whole and integrated, the way wolves were meant to exist. He's going to be a handful, Colvin said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Valen leaned back against his chest, smiling. He already is. Just like his mother then. She elbowed him playfully. I'm not a handful. You literally broke a centuries-old curse through sheer stubbornness. I think that qualifies. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had once been cold as winter and was now warm as summer sun. His eyes sparkled with humor and love, emotions he no longer had to hide. "How did the council meeting go?" she asked. "Well, the new High Steward is competent, and Lord Morven's trial concluded this morning. He'll spend the rest of his life in the very dungeon he once threw you into." Colvin's expression flickered with dark satisfaction. Poetic, I thought. More than he deserves. Perhaps, but you asked for mercy. So mercy he received. Valen had asked for that, yes. Not for her father's sake, but for her own. She didn't want his death on her conscience, even after everything he had done. Let him rot in darkness, knowing that the daughter he had despised had become queen, that her son would rule the kingdom he had schemed to control. That was punishment enough. "Mama!" Torin's delighted shriek drew her attention. He had managed 3 whole steps before tumbling onto his bottom, and he was looking at her with the proudest expression she had ever seen. Valen laughed, crossing to scoop him up. "Clever boy, such a clever, strong boy." Torin giggled, grabbing fistfuls of her hair. Colvin joined them, his arm wrapping around Valen's waist as he pressed a kiss to their son's forehead. "We did this," he said softly. "All of this. Together. We did. I never thought I'd have this." His voice roughened with emotion. "A family. A mate. A life that wasn't ruled by cold and duty and fear. I thought the curse made it impossible." Valen turned to face him, her free hand rising to cup his cheek. "The curse is gone," she said firmly. "The cold is gone. All that's left is us. You, I, Torin, and whatever comes next." She smiled. "And I plan to spend every single day of the rest of our lives reminding you that you deserve to be happy." Colvin's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you, Valen. More than I ever thought I was capable of loving anyone." "I know." She stretched up to kiss him softly. "I love you too." Behind them, the palace rose against a brilliant blue sky, no longer a cage, but a home. Around them, the gardens bloomed with spring flowers, and inside Valen's chest, her wolf stirred contentedly, curled up beside the mate she had helped to save. They had both been broken, both been cursed, both been convinced that they were empty, damaged, unworthy of love. But they had found each other anyway. And in finding each other, they had found themselves. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more tales like this one, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what you thought. I read every single one, and your words mean more than you know. Until next time.